Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bust channel, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today want to talk a little bit about the Defund the Police movement. Now, I am not an expert on this, so like many things I'm not an expert on, so understand that first when I'm giving my opinion. And also, this is an ongoing education, I'll say. I've definitely looked into certain things up until this point, but as we continue to hear more and learn more, ideas can change. But this is where I'm sitting at the moment. But really, it's not it's never me convincing you. It's just me telling you what I think. So the Defund the Police, to set the context, if you don't know, is this movement currently, well, multiple movements really, but it's let's just say a philosophy right now that one of the steps we can take towards solving issues with policing is to change their funding and to move some of that money that police get and instead give it to other places in the community, whether that be different services that can help enhance the community, whether that's putting money into other professions that can help police the community. And so it's a couple different ways you can look at it, but that's generally what it is. And so we'll get into the differences of people's opinions, but that's kind of the context. So with that being said, there's a number of things that I feel. Number one, this reminds me a lot of the Release the Snyder Cut people. I was making that joke to somebody, but honestly, it feels that way, in such that people need to word their things a little better. I mean, it's a product of the social media age. Everybody wants to make everything in a certain bite-size tagline or headline or tweet or Facebook post, whatever. And instead of putting real context to it, and as far as marketing, I get it. Short and simple is what people like, but it does become a problem with bigger ideas. Shout out to Terry Crews. And so when you're talking about these things, you got to be a little more specific. So I say that because people with the Snyder Cut, which I talked about before, and I'm not going to get into it here, but it was this thing where people say, all right, now we're talking about semantics. And semantics are not inherently negative. Semantics aren't inherently trivial. Semantics is a part of linguistics. It's very important to separate what you are saying. So people throwing that out there like that dismisses the conversation. Oh, it's just semantics. It's not. Semantics are important. So when you say defund the police, automatically a lot of people take it to its extreme conclusion. Now, some people are like, well, defund doesn't mean completely defund, but it could. Like, you can say defund the police to $1. Okay, well, now they're not completely defunded, but they're defunded. Or you can say defund the police by $1. And now they are defunded technically. And so obviously it's a spectrum of what defund can mean. So there's some people, instead of worrying about the actual message, they are pushing back against people like, obviously it doesn't mean get rid of police. Obviously it doesn't mean take away all their money. It's not obvious. I think you should be mature enough to say, it's obvious that people can take it the wrong way. And even if it's not obvious, you should be aware of that. So number one, the whole marketing thing has already kicked it off to a bad start, because a lot of people are just like, they take that, and politicians and media who have an agenda, they spin it to say defund the police equals get rid of police. And our president is one of those people who, whether by confusion or agendas, tried to equal defund police into getting rid of police. And that's not the exact same thing. So still, what people are trying to say really is, they can be saying different things, but really it's a combination of funding other people, or it's readjusting how much funding police get. And so defunding is just too strong of a word. All right, so that's one. Number two, this isn't new. Like, I continue to talk about this, and each day that goes by, it gets me more and more. I'm like, it's like I'm in the deja vu of the Ferguson riots, where everything I'm hearing right now we've heard before. And again, I recognize that I'm not sure what the name of it, but the age group, what is it, 21 to like 26, that main group of consciousness right now, that was 6 years ago for them, and they were teenagers when that happened. So I get it might be new for them, but there's me and my generation and all the older generations who've seen even more than Ferguson. Like, I feel like we should know this stuff, but I see so many people acting like, wow, this is a revolution, this is brand new. Ferguson called to defund their police before. Other places that have had public incidents have actually defunded their police departments. And so this isn't really a new idea. This is something that people have called for in masses around Ferguson. And again, like most of the things, it just kind of went by the wayside. Not to say that Black Lives Matter and other people haven't been fighting this whole time, but for the general population, most people went about their lives. And that's why they're acting like all this stuff is new. And so anyway, it's not a new concept, and it has been done. But I think that some people that are educated on the matter and really at the forefront, I think they want to make it bigger and more robust than it has been before. But I don't think the average person knows that. But anyway, so let's get into that idea of what some people think this looks like. There are some people on one side, as I mentioned, where they're talking about reallocation. And so they're talking about taking money from how much the police get and putting that money into other places. So there's people, obviously, I would be in favor of this, who want more money in the education system. There's people that think it could go to education, that it could go to human services in the facilities around, parks and recreation, YMCA, stuff like that. Obviously, again, like I said, the other human services with, child protection, whether it be any mental health, advocacy, all those different things. They rather see that money go to places in the community that can support in a different way than the police can. Then there's people that believe that the money and some of the responsibility, mainly the responsibility, should be shifted from cops and given to other people, and that money should be shifted to help hire those people. So what that looks like is, some people believe, like, if you are responding to a domestic violence situation, or if you're responding to a homeless person or somebody that is on drugs or has an addiction, or if you're responding to a sexual assault or a rape, things like that, people feel like there should be a response by people that are actually trained and specialized in that field. So whether that is having, usually you see child protective services work together with cops, but something like that, where you see, not a psychiatrist, what am I thinking of? Social worker that shows up, or somebody that is a psychiatrist, or another mental health specialist, or somebody that is specialized in sexual assault and survivor advocacy, things of that nature. And so instead of having cops with guns that can escalate the situation, they want to bring in professionals who are trained to deal with those people. And so in that sense, it's not super different than the idea of a school. where at one point you probably had teachers dealing with everything, and then eventually through advocacy there was creation of special education professionals, obviously bringing in school psychiatrists and counselors and social workers, things of that nature, where people who are more trained to do those things. And so that happens in the school system. So you can think of it that way, where a teacher does have a lot of responsibility, but in the perfect world, they're dealing with things of academics, and they're not dealing with things of behavior and punishment. They're not dealing with some of those bigger family or mental issues. And so that's what some people think. Give the money to these people, hire those people, and let them respond to these things. And then you got the other group that is like, let's get rid of police, period. Well, actually, let me back up. Also within the specialists, there's some people that think there shouldn't be, I don't know what you would call it, but basically there should be cops that don't have guns and weapons. So they should be like cops, but they don't have like lethal or non-lethal force. And so that basically these would be cops that can deal with traffic violations or simple disputes and violations and stuff that aren't violent. And so that they wouldn't be armed. And if something is violent or turns violent, that's when you would get the other cops involved, or, you know, the specially trained cops who deal with violence. So that's also part of that. And then lastly, you got the group that thinks you should just get rid of all cops. So I don't mean to laugh at it, but that there is some people that are like, just defund, as in get rid of the cops. So there are a group of people that believe that. Going back to my discussion about the marketing, you got 3 different ideals being pushed into the same thing. I will tell you now, with this and anything else I talk about, generalization is usually one of the root problems. And here we see it. Generalizing all these movements and ideas into one thing is where we get a lot of problems. So, and as far as getting rid of police, that's one of the parts that I really am still trying to learn what people suggest would be the replacement for that. And so those are all laid out. Now, my thoughts. Overall, I'm not really with the defund movement currently. At least in philosophy. I'm not sure that I think it changes things to the point what we're trying to get to. There's actually a couple reasons. So number one, I don't know if it changes things. There's people that brought up good points and some points that are natural. First of all, because even if you bring in more specialists, you're going to get rid of some cops. And so less of a police force to a lot of people might be understandable in the context, but there's definitely going to be people that are like little kids when the parents leave, like, oh, we're not being watched, let me take advantage of that. So there's going to be that. And honestly, it don't take a lot of people to have that go really badly. So whether you're talking about 1 or 2% of the city's population, that's still a lot of crime. And so there's going to be that. But then I think, just like the school example, that there's going to lead to overload. Like, if you look at the one school counselor right now, or the one school trained social worker, especially in the areas that we're worried about, they are overran all the time. And like I said, teachers would like to not to deal with that. That sounded weird, but they would like not to have to deal with those things. And so it's a lot of deferral, which it should be, but there's one person. And so let's say you took some money from the cops and you started adding these professionals. How realistic is it in every place to get as many as you need? You know what I mean? The same way that cops get stretched, if there's all your cops are out at on calls, and then there's another one or another incident happening, okay, well, now we're tapped. So the same thing, if cops are not responding and then the professionals are responding, but then there's 2 or 3 other cases, we're telling the cops not to respond, and we just got to wait for the one professional or the handful of professionals that you have to go respond. So obviously we can't be everywhere at all times, but still in the structure of what we have now, you want to limit the gaps that you have. And so I'm just wondering reasonably, how many people would you have to respond to those situations? And even if it's not a case of missing incidents, you're still going to overload some people, because now they're doing all of that extra work, and then you have people who aren't doing that work anymore. So that's what I worry about, gaps and overloading. Secondly, again, when we're talking about shifting money to professionals and whatnot, or even when we're talking about nonviolent situations, those can become violent. And as much as people don't want to have police sympathy right now, I still First of all, I know people that are cops, so I'm going to have sympathy. You get mad at me if you like, but any human, if you're like, hey, we want you as a trooper or highway patrol or whatever, we don't want you to carry guns or anything. Like, bro, it could get violent. It can get violent. And so, yes, it could, like, there's no way in my mind you could train these people, law enforcement, to think, oh, it's just a routine stop. No, you have to be preventative. You don't want to be reactive. And so you want to reduce the chances of an altercation. And so just going in there like, okay, it's all good. That's crazy. Like, that person could easily have drugs on them. That person could easily be a violent offender. That person, you could pull them over and then end up finding out that they have warrants for violent crimes. Like, a lot of things could happen. You don't know who's in there. It could be a hostage situation. It could be all types of stuff. And I understand people going to say that's not the norm. And I get that. But when we're talking about high stakes things, we're not talking about a regular run of the mill office work. We're talking about high stakes profession. You rather be safe than sorry. They always say that. And so to tell people to show up without any protection, or I wouldn't say without any protection, but to show up without guns and deterrence, I don't know. Like, yes, there is a bit of antagonizing that comes with it, but there is a bit of protection. And so if somebody's called to handle an incident and they're a quote unquote non-violent cop, and the people know that that's the type of cop that's showing up, there's going to be people that can take advantage of that. And again, it doesn't matter the percentage. It only takes one person to kill you. And so you're inherently making it more risky. And so there's people that point to Europe. And again, this is why I got to do more listening to see kind of what people are saying. But they're saying like Europe, they don't, there's a lot of cops that don't have that stuff. And basically what I heard is that, that taking the job, it's risky. And I don't know if that sits well with me, especially when you can do something to help it. So, but I'm not a cop, so maybe there are people that are gung-ho for it, and I don't know. But in my mind, I would think you would have less people willing to do that. So that's just my first thought. And then also, people have killed people without guns. We just saw a man whose name is everywhere in these protests was killed without any lethal force. And so that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so, and then also another thing is when we're talking about specialized people, those usually aren't the situations where people are being accosted, or not even accosted, where people are being murdered and brutalized. So it's not usually a situation of a routine, whatever they would call a nonviolent dispute. It's not usually those. It's usually has something that is suspected of being violent or is violent, and then it turns into that. And so, like somebody was saying that for the George Floyd situation, that they could have somebody that works with counterfeit bills. Like, okay, I mean, look, first of all, that was one of the things that the call was about. But they also said that the owner said that he was behaving erratically. And I don't know the full story, but let's just say it's not even George Floyd. Let's say it's the similar situation somebody else. Let's say somebody's trying to use counterfeit money. You say no, they get an attitude, they're tweaking their whatever, and you call the cops and say, we want this person out of our place. They won't leave. And, they're trying to use a counterfeit bill and we're refusing service. And you send somebody that's works with counterfeit or even works in de-escalation or negotiate, whatever it is. They're not violent cops. And they get there and the situation goes south and this person ends up having a knife or a gun or whatever. Like, does it really make sense to do that? And I just don't know that it does. Like, I understand not every situation needs lethal force or violent cops, as they say, or cops dealing with violence. But every situation potentially could need lethal force or cops that deal with violence. And that's the thing. So to me, it doesn't really make any efficiency sense to then try to cut that. And then the whole no cops thing, that's not even a question to me. I won't disrespect people that think that if they have some good reasons to put forth. But as I sit here right now, that's not even a consideration. That would absolutely be ridiculous. And so lastly, what I will say to the one that I think a lot of people agree with is reallocating funds to other places like schools and whatnot. I don't trust this government. I don't trust none of these politicians. That's my response to that. First of all, as somebody that has been in the system and one of the bigger systems, and as any regular person that it took any time to look at the history and the things this government has done, even as recently as last week, you trust these people? Now, if you're introducing to me a reallocation or defund with a new measure so in Illinois, for example, and some other states too, public salaries are, the salaries of people that work for state institutions are public. And so if you did something like that, where you made these budgets public and you line by line told us what money went where and what it's supposed to be for, that would be different. You think about all the campaign scandals alone and the rules of what you can do with campaign money, and they illegally do it all the time. And so you really think I'm going to listen to somebody say, hey, we're taking this money from the cops and putting it into other places to benefit the community, and that's it? And a lot of people will, because they know a lot of people will just be like, yeah, we won, good job, and walk away and not ask no questions. I do not trust the government in that capacity at all. And so, especially in Illinois. So there's no way I will be behind just reallocating funds to other state places without any transparency, or not even that, without any new law and legislation that forces transparency. Because I'm not going to depend on the kindness and the honesty of politicians. They need to be forced into having to be transparent. And then I could probably sign off on that. So again, I'll continue to learn, but as it sits right now, I'm not really on the train of defunding police. So go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Any ideas about all that? Share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for going out of bounds.